Call to order the Higher Education and Career Readiness Policy and Finance Committee. And the first item of business is our minutes, if you can find them, read them. Do I hear a motion to approve?
Mr. Chair, I make a motion to approve the minutes as prepared.
Representative Albright moves the minutes. Any discussion, corrections? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The minutes are approved. Our committee time today is devoted basically on just one subject, and that's the Board of Regents. And so hopefully you're full of questions and ideas, and we can make some real progress. We have our first bill up, and it's House File 1524, Representative Sundin. And I'll bring House File 1524 before the committee, and you can proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What's your intention of dealing with this bill? Are you laying it over, or are we going to have a vote on this, or what's the destiny?
This will be held over for possible inclusion.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Chair and committee, every couple of years we go through, I think what's common knowledge, a ridiculous ritual that's according to me and several others, when we get together and vote for people we don't know for some very important jobs here, as far as guiding the higher education policies of the state. And after one of these sessions, I sat down with the legislative assistant that I had at the time, a law student, and he said, "What the heck was that all about?" I says, "I really don't know." I says, there's got to be a better way to select regents, and we worked on this for a few weeks and came together with House File 1524 that actually relieves the RCAC Joint Legislative Committee of some of their duties, and actually shifts some of the responsibilities directly to the legislators within their congressional districts. So this bill was intended to inspire conversation. I hope it does so today.
I hope it does too. And at this point, we'll ask for any comments, questions from the members. Representative Albright.
Mr. Chair, I'm wondering if the author of the bill could just walk us through in terms of the broader context in terms of the provisions.
Representative Sundin.
Mr. Chair, I'd be glad to, if you go through section by section 1 through section 3, you'd be looking, I believe, okay, 1 section through 3 down to section 3C, you'll see the changes where they recommend candidates only for the at-large positions. That would be the duty of the RCAC in this case. So that's very simply limiting them to make recommendations only for the at-large positions. Okay, under subdivision 3, the conversation actually turns into the prescribing the duties of the legislators in the separate congressional districts, and it charges the legislators with nominating the regent for their specific congressional district. And I guess the only other thing that you might want to draw your attention to is the weighted voting in subdivision 4, where members of the Board of Regents shall be elected by the legislature at a joint convention on a date agreed to by a concurrent resolution for an at-large candidates. Each legislator's vote is equally weighed, notwithstanding any law to the contrary. For candidates nominated by congressional district, the votes from members of the congressional district legislative delegation under subdivision 3 shall be counted with twice the weighting of legislators who are not in the congressional district legislative delegation. So it brings a little more certainty to regents that represent a particular congressional district, that they be from or actually truly representative of that district because of the influence of the local legislators.
Representative Pryor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to put this in the context of how things are happening right now, Representative, would you be able to tell us where we are in the cycle? So in 2019, when there's regents being selected again, what seats are up and what districts are they from? And how does the different congressional districts and the at-large seats, how do they coincide every 2 years?
Representative Sundin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Pryor, I am not able to answer that question. I think maybe House researcher or somebody, someone on staff here could probably enlighten us.
Mr. Chair, Representative Pryor, I'm not sure exactly which seats are up in 2019, but I can find that out for you and get back to you.
I think we may have someone in the audience who could answer that.
Mr. Chair, 5th District and 3 at large, including the student.
Okay. Regent Rocha.
Thank you.
Got to identify who we are. So, we got you. Representative Pryor, do you have any other questions? Okay. Representative
Albright.
Albright. Do you have a question, Representative Albright?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Sundin. So in your bill and your recommended package of changes, you're carving out the RCAC just to make recommendations for the at-large positions. I have a couple questions with regard to that provision. So first off is, what was the rationale behind just availing the RCAC to the at-large positions? What was the thinking behind just those positions?
Representative Sundin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Albright. When I'm sitting on that House floor and I don't know where those nominations came from, I was unclear and not confident that my congressional district was represented properly all the time, or any other congressional district was represented in the nomination process. And to rely on influences from other portions of the state to have a regent that's going to represent me, I felt uncomfortable with that.
Mr. Chair.
Representative Albright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the follow-on to have to that question, Representative Sundin, is how would you mitigate the differing processes of vetting that the legislature would have and the RCAC would have for their at-large versus the congressional district candidates?
Representative Sundin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I'm understanding your question, I left the at-large responsibilities to the RCAC and just had exclusive input to those candidates from each particular congressional district.
Representative Sundin, Mr.
Representative
Chair.
Albright.
So then the quantitative or qualitative analysis could very likely be different. And so if every regent, by virtue of being elected to the region, is to serve the whole of the state, in spite of the fact that they come out of a CD, how would you resolve the differences between the RCAC choosing some and the legislature choosing some, to your point of not feeling comfortable with some versus others?
Representative Sundin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess to counter that thought, it would be why are we dividing it up into 8 congressional districts? Why, we could say they could all be at large, and let's say nobody from Roseau County would ever be considered a regent because of the concentration of population down in the metro areas.
Mr. Chair.
Representative Albright.
Representative Sundin, in further on in your bill, you states that they may bring no more than one candidate for each vacancy forward. Can you explain to me why that's an improvement on the current process?
Mr. Sundin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To that point, it would leave the sole responsibility of legislators from one particular legislative district or division thereof with the responsibility of nominating that one person, and it would still give the legislature, it would still empower the legislature to actually ratify that choice.
Mr. Chair.
Representative Armstrong?
Representative Sundin, so
All right.
so rather than an election by the whole body, what you're doing is basically relying upon one CD to assure the rest of the body that that person is in fact the person that should represent the whole of the state.
Sundin?
Mr. Chairman, I think you understand it clearly.
Mr. Chair. Representative Sundin, I think I do understand it very clearly, and that's why I would not approve of this, because much like you just said in your earlier arguments about relying upon others for the benefit of doing the vetting on candidates, what you're doing is you're setting up a CD to entirely vet for the benefit of the entire state without me being allowed the same opportunity. So for that, Mr. Chair, I would conclude my remarks.
Okay, thank you. Representative Schultz?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it actually may give people more representation if they have a person from their congressional district that they can go to with concerns about the university. So it actually may ensure that each geographic area in Minnesota has representation on the Board of Regents.
No response necessary unless you have one.
Oh, she's correct. Thank you.
Okay.
She's correct.
All right. Anyone else care to comment? Any other questions from members? Representative Whelan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Sundin, for bringing the bill. I apologize for missing the beginning of your comments, but I just wanted to say thank you for recognizing that we do need some change and some reform with the way that we handle the election of regents. So, I think all the proposals before us today are worthy of our consideration, and while I don't think anyone is going to be perfect, I just want to thank you for bringing forward an idea.
Anyone else? I would add that as long as I've been in the legislature, this has been a topic. Maybe finally we're getting to where we can do something about it. So, okay, no other questions, comments? Then I would then have House File 1524 relayed over for possible inclusion, and we thank you for coming.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, committee.
All right, next we have House File 3877. Well, Representative Pulaski, do you have a question?
Mr. Chair, just a question on what we're going to do. I realize you're laying these bills over, but this would also have to go to government operations. So is it your intent to pass one of these bills out today so it goes to GovOps? Because we are in deadline week. So is that the intention?
That is the intent.
But we don't know which one yet, or do we know which one? You don't need to answer.
It will be clear. No,
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
All right.
All right, we'll proceed. Representative Schultz, you've got House File 3877. And you have an author's DE1 amendment to also present to us? So do you want to begin with the,
I think we should begin with the amendment.
okay, sounds good. Representative Schultz, proceed.
So I'm Representative Jen Schultz. I want to thank the committee and the chair for hearing this bill. This bill addresses, I think, some of the concerns that we have with the regent selection process. And given that we have so many bills coming forward, I hope we can come to a bipartisan compromise on what the final process will look like. This bill creates a legislative commission on regent selection that has equal numbers of House members and Senate members appointed by leadership, and then of those members, one is elected as chair from the membership. And that commission reviews applications. The legislators would help recruit candidates to apply. They would go over criteria that's important to the university and the Alumni Association of the University of Minnesota. They would seek to have diversity of the candidates that represent the diversity of the university itself, and would make recommendations to the joint committee of 1 to 3 candidates for each vacancy. And they would get assistance from the Legislative Coordinating Commission to collect application materials and review them. So they would support this commission. And then the selection of candidates going to the joint committee would recommend 2 candidates for each vacancy, and whenever possible, there would be gender balance of those recommendations to the joint convention. And at the joint convention, there would be no additional nominations from the floor. And if more than one regent is elected, the candidates nominated by the joint committee, if that is a diverse pool of candidates with respect to gender, then the elected regents should also have a diverse appointment of elected regents in terms of gender. So there was a lot of concern in the last round. We had 36 applicants that we appointed regents that were not diverse in terms of gender, and there was a concern expressed to me by many in the public and in the media that we are not selecting a board of regents that reflects the diversity of the university. So I hope that we can come to a compromise where we can ensure that there is more diversity of our regent candidates, and I'm trying to open up that discussion on how we can get there.
Okay, Representative Schultz, we need to have a motion to actually adopt your DE1 amendment, so would you like to make that motion?
Sure, so moved.
Any questions at this point? If not, all those in favor of that motion, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion prevails, the amendment is adopted. And is there anything further you need to, I guess I'll open up for questions at this point.
Well, I think the idea behind, Mr. Chair, the idea behind having a commission is to keep it as nonpartisan as possible. So I think that was the goal, is to appoint or have recommendations with support in a bipartisan way of candidates.
Representative Heitzman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Schultz, just a quick question. Why not allow nominations to be made from the floor?
Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's prudent for us to review the qualifications and use a set of criteria to review applicants. I think when they're nominated from the floor, we don't have that ability. And in the last round, we were nominating individuals who had not even been contacted about their willingness to serve.
Representative Heitzman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just to follow up then, when you had candidates that were nominated from the floor who had previously been vetted and had in some cases served, you're disqualifying them, saying that they shouldn't have that opportunity to serve again, or even though they may have in years past been vetted, that vetting process is no longer valid? Is that your point?
No, I
Schultz.
think, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that the legislators being on this commission will, I hope, act accordingly and review candidates, and those that they think are the best qualified will be recommended to go to the next joint committee and then to the joint convention. I just want to make sure that we're not nominating people from the floor that have not gone through a process to check their qualifications.
Mr. Chair.
So-
Heitzman?
Mr. Chair, so then, are you saying then that if they have been through the process in years past, they wouldn't have to be vetted again, or that they could, or that you may be open to allowing them to be nominated from the floor, or not?
Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If they want to apply again, I think they can apply again. And if they've been qualified in the past, I would hope, unless something changed, that they would be also qualified to go through that process. There might be more qualified individuals that may better serve the university in terms of holes that the regents would currently have in someone's background or occupation or qualifications that we needed to fill. So the person could be qualified, but may not fit the criteria that we develop as a commission in terms of what's the priority or what's important for that vacancy in that year.
Mr. Chair,
Representative Heitzman.
just a quick comment. I think that in testimony, we heard in this committee that the current process has come under criticism, and maybe people agree with that, maybe they don't, but either way, I can see scenarios developing where at least the opportunity to select somebody who may not have been brought forward by the commission, that provides an opportunity for a check and a balance. And I just would think that that elimination of a part of the process we currently know, that could be a little bit disconcerting.
Any comments, Representative Schultz? Anyone else? Representative Pryor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to understand the process, it would be written in statute that there could not be nominations from the floor. So then, because it's written in statute, the rules could not be essentially suspended, or could the legislature, that's the joint legislature, is it possible, and this is a more, that there could be a vote taken to change essentially statute at that point, if it was the desire of the majority of the body to do that. And I guess this is the understanding of how these things work.
Representative Schultz, do you have an answer
I
for
think
that?
that might be correct, but we should verify that with research.
Mr. Chair, Representative Pryor. So in statute, it does say that the joint rules must conform to the statutory requirement that there be no nominations on the floor. However, there could be a motion on the floor to suspend the rules. Similar things have happened in the Joint Legislative Committee before. It says the Joint Legislative Committee must recommend just one candidate, but there have been situations where the Joint Legislative Committee couldn't come to a consensus on just one candidate. So they've recommended two instead. And that does conflict with the statute, but the legislature does have a prerogative to control its own internal procedures. So frankly, I'm not positive how it would work out, but I could see it happening that the legislature's internal procedures could override even a statutory mandate.
Representative Pryor.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification. And so essentially, what this would do then is if the three candidates came forward, if there was a discussion of somebody else that should be nominated, it's very possible that that person would still be nominated, but it would there would be that would be a very deliberate step by that body, and would be very much noted if that did happen. But it very possibly, even this statute would not preclude it from happening. And if that's your understanding also.
It is my understanding.
Representative
Thank you, Ms. Representative Pryor.
Okay. Representative Albright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Schultz, in subdivision 5, you lay out that the joint rules, and maybe this is what Representative Pryor is speaking to as well, so forgive me if I'm being redundant, but it talks about the joint rules of both the House and the Senate must be amended to conform to the requirements of this section. If there's a conflict between the joint rules and this section prevails. Aren't you setting it up for a bit of a constitutional or a legal battle between law and the internal rules of both the House and the Senate?
Representative Schultz.
I'm going to ask House Research to answer that question.
Mr. Hunt.
Mr. Chair, Representative Albright, I think this does get back to Representative Pryor's question. The statute says that there's a conflict between the joint rules in this section, but there could be a situation where a vote could be taken to suspend the joint rules. So in that instance, the joint rules wouldn't be applying. That's kind of the best answer I have for you right now.
Mr. Chair, I have a...
Albright.
Mr. Hopkins, to follow on to that then. In the event that any changes were made to the election and due diligence process of Board of Regent candidates. Isn't it entirely possible that regardless of the rules that are laid out, both the House and or the Senate could suspend the rules and take up whatever determination of candidates they would wish?
Mr. Hopkins?
Mr. Chair, Representative Albright, ultimately, the charter of the University of Minnesota, which is incorporated into the Minnesota Constitution, does say that a joint convention of the legislature is responsible for electing the regents. So that joint convention would make the ultimate determination. If it voted to suspend the rules, the joint rules, and take up a new candidate, it could do that. And under the Constitution, it's the one body that's empowered to finally elect a regent.
So, Mr. Hopkins, Mr. Chair.
All right.
It's entirely possible that what we are deliberating here to some extent is in vain, based upon the intentions of either body in separate or in joint session could suspend the rules and decide it on their own regardless of our best intentions here today.
Mr. Hopkins, you got an answer?
Mr. Chair, Representative Albright, yes, a motion to suspend the joint rules could circumvent the statutory mandates in this bill. I believe as Representative Pryor.
Mr. Hopkins.
Yes, indeed, yeah. As Representative Pryor mentioned, though, the motion to suspend the rules would be a special measure that people would take notice of.
Representative Albright? Any more?
No, I think I got my answer.
All right. Anyone else? Anyone else in the audience need to address this bill? Okay. Representative Schultz, any final message here to the board?
Sure. So I hope that we reevaluate the process and we improve it. I have received a lot of feedback on ideas from student governance at the University of Minnesota, from the University of Minnesota Alumni Association, and from members of the public. So I just want them to know that I appreciate all of their input and working with me on developing something. And I'm willing to work with this committee and with the chair to develop something to improve the process.
And we thank you for all the work. This is not easy. And thank you very much. House File 3877, that will be laid over for possible inclusion in an omnibus bill or for further action at a later time. Next up, House File 2682. Representative Whelan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I do have an amendment, the DE3, that I would like to offer.
Okay.
Just gets the bill in the shape I'd like.
Okay, House File 2882, the DE3. 2682, is that what? Okay, that's the House file, got it right. Okay, you want to describe what your amendment is all about?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So originally, my bill was a simple repeal of the RCAC, and then it would have put us back to the way we previously elected regent candidates. The DE is in a response to many conversations that I've had with members on this committee and others that suggest we want to go in a direction that would, rather than just bring us back to what we used to do, give us something new to help us elect regent candidates. And so it's very similar to some of the other proposals we've heard and that we're discussing. It would appoint 4 members from the House and Senate Higher Education Committees, so an 8-member committee altogether, with equal representation from each party to vet candidates for the at-large positions. And then it would also establish a more formal process for each congressional legislative delegation to submit their recommendations for regent candidates that would serve in each district.
Any question on the amendment? If not, we need a motion to approve the DE 3 amendment. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? The amendment is adopted. Discussion? Anything further? You have someone to testify as well?
I do, Mr. Chair. I did have just a few comments, and then I'll have my testifier come up, if that's all right with the committee.
Sure.
I have, as I mentioned, I've had some great conversations with folks, and I think that overall, I appreciate that there seems to be consensus for reform of the way we elect regents. There is in your packet some information that we received recently from the House Research on the regent selection process and the reason that we established the RCAC to begin with. Just to remind everyone, the independent study group at that time in 1986 noted that it seemed political partisanship was the main qualification for regents, hence the RCAC. However, I find it very interesting that the way that the RCAC was established actually has perpetuated this, because the RCAC itself has membership that can be inherently partisan. You have 24 members, 12 appointed from the House, 12 appointed from the Senate, and there could be no more than 8 from either that are part of one political party. So if one party controls both houses, you could end up having 16 members of a 24-member RCAC from one political party. That's inherently partisan. Now, most of the proposals we're hearing in my proposal today actually would be an even split of both parties, which would actually, I believe, remove the partisanship that we are seeing. So with that, I would like to invite Darren Rocha up to share on his perspective on this proposal and others, and then open it up for conversation. I'm also
Okay.
happy to answer questions, Mr.
Regent
Chair.
Rocha? Afternoon, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Darren Rocha, Independence, Minnesota. Currently serve as the 3rd District Regent on the University of Minnesota Board of Regents, and I'm joined by my colleague from the distinguished 4th District. Regent Beeson is over here, I think. I think we're the only 2 in the room. Shall I have at it, Mr. Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
All right, thank you. I've already laid out quite a bit to you in previous conversations. I've had a chance to look at the various bills, and there's obviously activity going on at the Senate side as well. So I appreciate Representative Whelan's giving me an opportunity to address this a bit. I think that as I've looked at all of the various proposals that have come forward, I think all of them move us in the right direction as a state in the election of regents. I think they all are better than the current process, particularly because they put they move the interaction to the legislature at an earlier phase, at least for most of the seats. With respect to the congressional district activity, as I think I've mentioned in the past, one of the things that I like about that is the more touch points you create between legislators and regents, I think the more accountability you will have from the regents to the legislature and more of a familiarity to ensure that the university, which is an extremely important public institution, is serving people the best that it can. When I first heard of the proposal for a balanced panel, it struck me as novel. I guess I had sort of considered that, in the effort to seek to minimize the partisanship in the selection of regents, which I think has always been there. I haven't necessarily seen it manifest itself clearly on the board as a clear delineation between regents. But in the selection process and the appearance of partisanship, which I think has an impact on the public's trust in what the regents represent, the idea of a split panel is really interesting to me. I think that it's, I previously considered that, elections have consequences and therefore the majority party will control these types of selections. But sometimes those consequences lead to unnecessary issues, such as a board being seen less as a benevolent governance entity and more as a partisan creation. I don't think that's entirely eliminated because you still have phases to go through where some partisanship can have an impact, as I think you discussed momentarily ago. But then if most legislators support the wisdom of their colleagues and the work of their panel, the result will be better than current practice, and let me explain just a little bit. A full repeal is good, but obviously you've got to replace it with something. I think these proposals take you there. In considering I think the points that Representative Schultz is seeking, particularly as it relates to gender balance, I would actually say that certainly there are other constituencies that are concerned about other kinds of balance as well, not just gender, but that obviously we can see is a significant concern, and the board right now does not reflect as she directed the state community and the university community. I do think that a balanced panel of legislators rather, I think is an effective way of trying to get to that issue, because I certainly think that when you have a lot of independent decisions being made, you can end up with results. I mean, everybody might pick, 52-year-old white male dentists, and that's the entire board if everyone's making their independent choices. Whereas if the panel is making this consideration for its recommendations, they can certainly take these things into consideration, particularly if they've had good feedback from the alumni associations and others as to what the board looks like and what it should look like. The benefits of a panel, I think a balanced approach means a panel will really need to focus on the attributes of candidates to gain support of both parties' members. There will be compromise, I think, inherently, especially for the at-large positions. And this will make outliers less likely and will require support from both parties for every nominee. It also has the risk is if the university board gets way out of sync with what the majority thinks, you could have situations where you try to suspend the rules and kind of put more dedicated regents in place, but I think that's somewhat remote. But this is a process that all legislators, I think, can respect, especially because you know that while you may not be in the majority today, you may be in the majority tomorrow and vice versa. So to the extent that everybody sort of takes into account the university as such a critical entity, that we want to try to elevate that dialogue and hopefully come to good results that way. The process is transparent. The motivations of legislative panel members are known. The current process, throughout the RCAC experiment, one of the challenges is that there are relationships between people on the council and the university and other relationships. Those aren't revealed to the legislature when you receive some recommendation from them. And so, at least with the legislative folks, you have relationships with your colleagues and your constituents, and that's where your accountability lies. And I think that's going to have an impact on the communication you have with candidates and the vetting that you do of candidates to ensure that they're coming in for a proper public purpose. Very importantly, one of the things that's really attractive about the models that you're currently discussing is it's a single campaign. Imagine you in your legislative lives having to go to some other part of the state and meet with people who don't live in your district to get an endorsement and then have to go back and run in your district. That's kind of what happens here when you have the RCAC panel not actually conducting the election. So you have one campaign to those folks and then a very different one when you're talking to members of the legislature and the things that legislators are really concerned about, in particularly how the university is accountable with state resources, how it provides access to your constituents, and so on. It builds much more like an endorsement into a primary, into a general election, and I think I can tell you as a candidate who's been through this process 3 times, that is a much more attractive process than having to meet the perspectives of different groups in that way. I also think that a legislative panel approach creates a great opportunity, a relationship for the board and the legislature. Assuming that there are qualified legislators who are interested in serving in this way, they will gain an expertise in University of Minnesota governance and also understanding the issues of autonomy, and the benefits flow both ways. When the legislature has a concern, the bipartisan committee will be informed and invested and can speak to the board, and likewise when the university has concerns, members of the bipartisan panel with the leadership of both chambers and higher ed will be able to work with the board somewhat as partners, I think. There are other ancillary advantages, but the biggest thing is the balanced legislative panel will be supported by LCC, and the panel will be able to take input from constituencies, the Alumni Association and others. The same publication and recruitment will occur as occurs now. And they'll be able to inform the public that these seats are open. And also people who are currently involved in the RCAC process as council members will obviously have the ability to recruit candidates, vet candidates, and promote candidates and support them at the legislative panel. In short, nothing is lost. In fact, you just end up with a much better relationship, a much clearer process between the legislature and members of and candidates for the Board of Regents, which I think would certainly make the process more streamlined, and I think would produce great results of accountable regents. And subject to your questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for your testimony. Members have questions? Representative Pawlowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Regent Rocha, the Office of Legislative Auditor issued a report on the Regent Candidate Advisory Council in 2015. Can you share with the committee, because it did deal with incidents that had occurred in your selection process, what the review of the legislative auditor was of the process?
Regent Rocha.
Mr. Chair, Representative Pawlowski, sure. By way of a bit of background, it is one of the things that for me has reflected the disconnect between the original intent of the RCAC experiment and what it ultimately has turned into, whereby the vetting process, which is so highly subjective, and I think I walked you all through it last time I was in front of you, it's so subjective as to be, I think oftentimes used as a tool to advantage some candidates over others. In this particular instance, the RCAC, advisory is in the name. It doesn't have the power to select regents. It has the authority to advise the legislature on candidates for the position, and we can talk about whether they were supposed to be giving a full range of 4 candidates or whether it was to be, more of a puppetry to determine how people were elected. But in 15, when I made the application, and I mean it's a kind of a long story, and our time's somewhat limited here. I was not interviewed, somewhat as a surprise to me, and I've already mentioned that to you. And another candidate who is eminently qualified was not recommended. Both he and I, without coordinating or knowing the other was doing it, we both thought that that was inappropriate, and we both pursued, continued to pursue service on the board. And the 3rd District legislators met, as tradition provided, with the rules of that same process, and I was endorsed by the 3rd District. And a couple members of the sitting RCAC, and the quote was, "We have to stop this," because they were not about to allow someone who was not their selectee prevail in the election to be a member of the Board of Regents. At that point, they acquired a list of former regents. They went back and pulled my file, which under the data practices was supposed to be sealed because I was not interviewed. They pulled that out. They emailed that out to a bunch of people with the private data on there, including that of my references and so on. And I started getting these panicked phone calls from people saying, "I thought you said that I wouldn't get a call because you were not being interviewed." And I said, "Well, apparently some people have taken it upon themselves to modify the rules or the statute for RCAC, and they've started this collateral attack." The feedback that I was getting is that there were no questions asking for anything positive. I think I might have mentioned to you already that one of the former regents with whom I served said that it was, quote, "hatchet job." Another person was so uncomfortable by the questions that she started taping the conversation, and this is a highly successful professional in this community. So the auspice was this was supposed to be a background check on me to somehow aid the legislature in determining whether I was an appropriate candidate, even though RCAC would have had the opportunity to do the same thing had they conducted an interview, and I would have had an opportunity to present my case for my candidacy. As a result of that, I contacted one of the people making the call, and I just said, "I want to make very clear that you don't have my authorization to use my data. I don't know where this." I called the LCC, and they had not provided approval. It had not been cleared with the chair. It just simply reflected that some members of the RCAC were so adamant about being able to control regent selection that they were willing to walk through the statute and my rights to try to affect that change, or try to prevent me from being elected. And again, so my expectation is this is one of the clear reasons why the experiment to try to have that input has really, I think, turned into some folks, believing that they have control of a regent selection process that has for 160 years been vested in members of the legislature to exercise their discretion in who should be governing the University of Minnesota Board.
Representative Pulaski, any further follow-up? Okay. Members, any other questions of the testifier or of the author? Representative Albright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Regent Rocha, I've also looked at the OLA report, and while it certainly is unsettling, particularly in light of the process that you underwent, I don't see in here where there is a proclivity that this is an ongoing practice of the RCAC, and I'm just wondering if you'd be willing to comment that, if you have any response to that comment.
Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Albright. A lot of folks have served in RCAC over the years, and the overwhelming majority are amazing people with amazing careers in public service, and all of them are there for the right reason. I have no reason to believe that that is an ongoing process. There was a disappointment for me because I do know that a couple of legislators, different parties, different chambers, raised the question about whether the people that had acted that way should remain on the council. And, I think there's a pretty good argument if I'm on that council saying, well, if somebody has been found to have, fallen outside the rubric, maybe that's not the best place for them to be. But as near as I can tell, the determination was that that was fine and they continued to serve on it, which for me was really uncomfortable because then 2 years later when that unexpired term concluded, I then had to choose as to whether I should submit myself in front of the same council that had, in my view, not treated my desire to serve my state and my university very well. So I don't believe that that is a continuing process. But I would point out, and as I talked about in the last time I believe when I presented here, there is not a consistent way of conducting background checks. And from my perspective, when you're talking about folks that are running for the Board of Regents and their level of accomplishment and so on, these aren't entry-level folks. These are people with reputations and careers, and a lot of it's very publicly known. The idea that different people can conduct different background checks, and in the case where the OLA report, the people that decided that they would conduct background checks on me had already expressed publicly that they opposed my candidacy. So what's the likelihood of that being a nice, unbiased, and objective evaluation of what I bring to the table? It's still a problem in that there isn't a consistency. You have different people that are doing background checks on people for the same office. Some may be supportive of a candidate, some may be in opposition. It's not a very good process for having that kind of clarity. But for me, I don't think, to me, I don't even get to that issue. To me, I get to the issue of the people that we as a board are accountable to are the people of the state through their elected representatives, and that's you folks.
Representative Albright?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to the author of this bill, then, Representative Whelan, how would, in response to what we've just heard from Regent Rocha, would your bill rectify that situation?
Representative Whelan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Albright. I'm not sure I understand the question. How would my bill rectify the situation that we find with the RCAC? Can you rephrase the question for me?
Mr. Chair.
Representative Albright?
Representative Whelan, it would seem that there is a preponderance of discussion surrounding the use and or the misuse of the reference checks and who's doing those, who's not doing those, at the discretion of whom or not. And so I'm wondering how you rectify the standardization without weaponization of the reference check process under your bill.
Representative Whelan?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Albright, for clarifying the question and stating it in that way. I am not 100% positive that the bill that is before you, the DE, specifically addresses the background checks, although I believe we direct the LCC to provide administrative support and services. Yes, subdivision 3, lines 2.4 to 2.5. So in my view, the Legislative Coordinating Commission would help with that process. Now, I'm very open to amendments that we can add to this or other language that would ensure data privacy for the candidates that are undergoing this process, if that's something that we need to look at.
Okay, any other, Representative Schultz, question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Why only recommend one candidate for the at-large seats?
Representative Whelan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Schultz. I am looking for that line.
2.2.
In the bill. Thank you. The joint subcommittee. I believe that's the way that the current process is. So the joint subcommittee, the Higher Education Joint Subcommittee, recommends one candidate to the Joint Legislative Committee. And as we've heard from nonpartisan research already, in times when there's been trouble getting to that, we sometimes have suspended the rules. I know we've recommended 2 in the past. So I just figured that process seems to have worked, and people can still nominate from the floor, which I also believe is a good process. So mostly I wanted to work with changing the way that we are, as a joint higher education committee, presenting these candidates to the Joint Legislative Convention. Didn't necessarily want to stop other legislators that don't serve on the Higher Education Committee from that opportunity to present.
Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess we should think about what makes the most sense. And if there are several qualified candidates and the subcommittee is doing all of this work and vetting the candidates and reviewing them, if I'm not on that subcommittee, but I'm on the general committee, I would like to know if there are other qualified candidates. It would give me more assurance if that person happens to be nominated from the floor, that was one of the maybe 3 candidates that were recommended for one at-large seat. So I would recommend revisiting that and see if you'd be amenable to recommending more than one candidate.
Representative Whelan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Schultz. I'm very open to amending that. I would say, in my view, those conversations would come out in the committee process. So you or I or whoever would be able to ask questions of the subcommittee members to say, why this candidate, why not this candidate? And we could have a robust conversation at that time. And then if we decided, so the subcommittee that's recommending candidates can explain their reasons why. The joint committee of the House and Senate Higher Education Committee could recommend different candidates than the subcommittee does based on the conversation that comes out of that hearing.
Any follow-up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is the subcommittee a public committee? Would the public be invited to attend the subcommittee?
Representative Whelan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Schultz. I might have to defer to nonpartisan research on the specifics of how that may or may not be clear in the language, but in my view, it would be public.
Public.
Hopkins.
Mr. Chair and members, yes, this would be a joint committee of the legislature, so its members would be open to its meetings would be open to the public.
All right. Anyone else? Anyone in the audience? Thank you, Regent Rocha, for being here and your testimony. House File 2682 then is laid over for possible inclusion in an omnibus bill or for further action if necessary later. All right. All right, we have one more bill, I believe. The chair moves House File 3372 before this committee to be re-referred to the Committee on Government Operations and Elections. We have an amendment, the DE3 amendment, and who is offering that?
I am, Mr. Chair.
Albright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members, I would move the DE3 amendment before the committee. Or is that proper in terms of this bill would be laid over, correct?
We will probably be voting on this one.
This one?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'd move the DE3.
Okay. Do you want to talk on it before we vote on it, or?
I would. So, members, I think one of the things that has candidly troubled me about this whole process over the last several weeks is the contention that the RCAC, while we would certainly take umbrage at some of the actions and activities that they have undertaken in previous Regent reference searches and interviews, I think some of the responses given here, with all due respect, are a bit of a rush to judgment with regard to the activities of the RCAC. And I'm going to elaborate on those from the standpoint of the legislature, while it is the final arbiter of the decision to who will be placed on the Board of Regents. I do think that it is incumbent upon us to utilize the services of the RCAC, while there certainly is some mission creep, and my amendment addresses that, to support the activities of the legislature with regard to bringing forth and screening through the vetting process of those that are most viable to attend to the business of our land-grant institution. And so as you take a look at this amendment, what I have done and crafted with the support of both members and constituents is an abbreviation of the number of chairs on the board bringing that a little more into line, but also reflecting upon the process that RCAC undertakes and streamlining the process that they would do in an effort to provide greater enforcement and due diligence by the legislature itself upon the RCAC. While we can all agree that there are improvements to be made, and some would suggest, as has been evidenced by the bills in front of us thus far, that the RCAC is to be done away with, I am not of that opinion. I think there is a place for the RCAC. I think they've done incredible work. I think that the anomaly that unfortunately was exhibited upon Regent Rocha, while very unfortunate, does not exhibit the candor nor the tempo of the work that they do. And so the amendment that I am talking to, the DE3, would streamline the process of the RCAC. I think it would bring greater clarity to the purpose that they are to process through the candidates for search, screen, and vetting. It certainly gives the legislature more latitude in terms of coordination with not only the university, but the RCAC for the intent and purpose of what type and caliber of people that we're looking for as we go forward as a vision for the University of Minnesota and where we need to go and the type of people that we are certainly looking for. But I understand where we're going with this. I understand that I may be, as Representative Pulowski has often described to me, a voice wailing in the wind. And so with that, I want people to take due consideration of the amendment in my comments, but at this time I am withdrawing the amendment.
Representative Albright withdraws his amendment. And Representative Schultz, you withdraw your question too then.
Well, Mr. Chair, I think if
Representative
you
Schultz.
revisit this, Representative Albright, I think it could be strengthened, and, I'm not opposed to retaining RCAC, since there is a reason why it was developed, but make it more nonpartisan by having the majority and the minority party each appoint members equally. So instead of the 2/3 of the members, have the Senate majority and minority appoint 4 each, and same for the House. So.
All right. With those closing comments, we'll move on. I haven't had static like that for a while. We'll deal with it by talking louder. I have an author's amendment. This is for House File 3327. It's the DE4 amendment, author's amendment. And quickly we'll go through what that means, what it's going to do. Bill establishes a legislative commission on regent selection that would replace the Regent Candidate Advisory Council. It creates a bicameral commission, which includes 4 House members, 2 appointed by the majority, 2 by the minority, 4 Senate members, again, 2 from the majority and 2 from the minority. The chair of the commission alternates biannually, first appointed by the Speaker, the next the Senate Majority Leader, and so forth. The commission develops selection criteria in consultation with the current and former regents and the University of Minnesota Alumni Association and the administration of the University of Minnesota. The Legislative Coordinating Commission continues to work in the same way it does now, as they have with the ARCA, with the RCAC, by providing administrative and supportive services. And the commission will recommend 1 to 3 candidates per vacancy. That's the extent of the DE4 amendment. Any discussion? Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could you just clarify the 8 members? Is the chair coming from the 8-member appointments, or is this an additional member?
It would be from the 8 members.
From the 8 members?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. All those in favor of the DE4 amendment, say aye. Aye. Opposed? The DE4 amendment is adopted. Have another amendment, I believe, the A2 amendment. Representative Schultz?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the A2 amendment is also a standalone bill, but currently we have no language to remove a regent if that regent has any reason to be removed for malfeasance or nonfeasance or has done something unlawful or there's misconduct. So this provides some language to the Board of Regents by a 2/3 vote to remove an elected regents, and there'll be a notice and a public hearing as well.
Discussion?
Mr. Chair?
Representative Albright.
Mr. Chair and Representative Schultz, how would this amendment comport to the Code of Ethics for Board of Regents?
Representative Schultz.
I think I'll defer to the House Research for that question.
Mr. Chair, Representative Albright, currently there's nothing providing for the removal of a regent in the University of Minnesota's Board of Regent policies. The Board of Regents is not empowered to remove one of its members currently.
Mr. Chair?
Representative Albright.
Mr. Hopkins, just as an add-on to that, then, are we, as a legislative body, availed to the opportunity to speak to a removal of a regent because of the composition and/or the land grant situation of the University of Minnesota?
Mr. Hopkins.
Mr. Chair, Representative Albright, Article 8, Section 5 of the Minnesota Constitution states the legislature can provide for the removal of inferior officers for malfeasance or nonfeasance in the performance of their duties. So I think the provision in this amendment would rest on that provision in the Minnesota Constitution.
Any further questions? Representative Albright.
Just to clarify then, Mr. Hopkins, that we are treating regents as officers of the state of Minnesota or the State University of Minnesota? And if there's a clear delineation between the two?
Mr. Hopkins.
Mr. Chair, Representative Albright, the Constitution doesn't specify who is and who is not an inferior officer. Article 8 provides for the impeachment of certain officers, including the governor, the attorney general, and then all other inferior, and then it just says inferior officers. So typically that might be taken to mean everyone else other than the people for whom the Constitution explicitly provides impeachment proceedings. But the Constitution says inferior officers and does not elaborate any further.
Thank you, Mr. Hopkins.
Mr. Chair, there's been a drafting error, so we need to delete lines 1.17 through 1.21. If you would accept an oral amendment,
We will accept the oral
I'll
amendment.
so move that amendment for those deletions.
Any other questions? Oh, yes. We'll vote on your oral amendment.
Thank you.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It's adopted. Now we have the amendment in front of us. Any other comments? Anyone else? Okay. We have someone would like to come down and share a comment. Please identify yourself for the record and then proceed, both of you.
Sure.
Yeah.
Chair Nornes, members of the House Higher Education Committee. My name is Lisa Lewis. I'm President and CEO of the University of Minnesota Alumni Association, and I live in Eden Prairie. The University of Minnesota Alumni Association extends gratitude to the Minnesota State Legislature for their financial support of the university. We thank you for your investments in the careers and knowledge of the alumni we represent. You have a constitutional duty to elect the regents of the University of Minnesota, and the Alumni Association applauds the thoughtful commitment to make sure that there is a thorough process that leads to outstanding candidates. The Alumni Association, which serves and engages more than 477,000 graduates, has a vested interest in ensuring that the university's governing body, the Board of Regents, is comprised of highly qualified, mission-driven leaders who are committed to the long-term success of our world-class university. So therefore, we'd like to offer input and the alumni voice to the current discussions regarding the Board of Regents. The Alumni Association is an independent organization, and we do not speak for the University of Minnesota or the Board of Regents. With more than 290,000 University of Minnesota Twin Cities alumni living in Minnesota, we recognize the importance of the university as an economic engine that produces an educated workforce, serves the public, and conducts research that impacts nearly every life of Minnesota. Ensuring that the university has a strategic, visionary governing body that represents all of Minnesota is vital to all alumni and the value of every degree. Our alumni care about this process and finding the best candidates possible to serve on the Board of Regents. I note that the UMAA does not endorse any candidate for regent. Our role has been to share information about the process of how to apply to become a regent and to host a regent candidate forum for all who want to participate. We try to get the word out and get the best candidates possible in the pool. As the legislature reviews the potential changes to the selection process and the various approaches of a number of bills discussed today, we urge it to consider the following 3 important points. Number 1, there should be an open and transparent process where individuals across the state can apply to become a regent and qualifications are identified and vetted. Number 2, there should be consideration given to having a board that reflects the diversity of the state and the aspirations of the university. And those aspirations include recruiting and retaining students, faculty, and staff from underrepresented populations. And number 3, the selection process should incorporate a holistic view of the university priorities and regent candidate backgrounds and qualifications. This holistic view can help ensure that the board as a whole, as a team, has the strengths and skills necessary to successfully govern a complex public institution. Recently, the Alumni Association informed its members that the legislature was looking into the possibility of changing the regent selection process. One alumnus told us that we should do what we can to explore the need for more thoughtful consideration of candidates from across the state's socioeconomic, gender, and race spectrum. Another alumnus wrote, regent selection should be, as far as possible, completely separate from political ideology. We share your commitment to finding thoughtful leaders who envision and achieve the university's mission to educate, serve, and solve the grand challenges here in Minnesota and around the world. Chair and members of the House Higher Education Committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify this afternoon. The UMAA continues to be available to assist you as you consider the process that seeks candidates for the Board of Regents. I thank you for your time, and I'm available for any questions or comments.
Thank you. Representative Christensen.
Mr. Chair, this is just really a question for you. Are we on discussion in testimony right now on the Schultz amendment or on the bill as a whole?
It should be confined to the amendment, but I didn't want to interrupt you. Do you have, the amendment is what's before us. Do you have an opinion on that? It removes possibly a regent?
The Alumni Association recognizes that good board governance is important to the institution, and generally across the board, good board governance includes some kind of mechanism for removal of a regent. Whether that is done legislatively or whether that is done at the Board of Regents level, I think that's a process question, but we would endorse that there be some kind of recognized process in place in case that's ever needed.
You got some further testimony from your partner?
And none at this time.
Okay, all right. Thank you both for being here. Any questions before they leave? Okay, thank you for coming down. Representative Whelan, do you have a question before they get away? Okay. Do you have a question?
Just on the amendment.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the way that I read this, it's the Board of Regents is the body that would be voting to remove one of its own. My concern, and maybe it's a kind of a two-part question and comment. My concern would be that the legislature is the body that elects the regents, and so I believe we should be the body that would be considering removal of regents. That's just kind of my initial reaction. But I'm wondering, and I know nonpartisan staff did address this. It seems there's somewhat of a process already for this. So I'm just wondering if Representative Schultz would be amenable to, if we need to make the removal process of a regent more clear, giving that authority to the legislature versus the Board of Regents itself.
Representative Schultz.
Yeah, I hate to make it more political. We're appointing the Board of Regents, so I hope we would have the confidence in their ability to judge with legal advice if there's a problem with the Board of Regents that's malfeasance or nonfeasance related, and give them the authority to do that. But this is, I think, maybe that might be the first time we're discussing this in the legislature about the removal process. So we might need more time to discuss it, but I think it's important that we come to some agreement on that we have a process. And I would prefer to keep it the way it is, but I'm open to other input.
Representative Whelan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Schultz. And perhaps it does require more conversations offline. I would just respond to the idea of it being political. I did mention in my own comments that as much as we can, we should make it nonpartisan, equal representation of both parties. But at some level, I don't know that it's possible to remove the politics of it entirely, as it is the legislature that is tasked with the ability to appoint regents, and it has been that way before our state. The legislature is the one body that does this. And so because it is one of the very few ways that we as a legislature can exercise a check on the university, because it's a resource we all want to maintain and use, I would say if we are the ones appointing the regents, absolutely we want to make sure, and we would all think that they're going to do a good job. And if we find one of them is not, then we should be the ones that would vet that for their removal. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Omar. Omar, have a question?
Thank you, Chair. I think just to follow up with what Representative Whelan was discussing, and maybe something that I think Representative Schultz brought up, the Board of Regents has existed for a really long time, so I'm just curious if this has come up within the Board of Regents, and if there is a kind of process that they might use that might not be mandated by us. And so I wonder if Regents Rocha might have an opinion of, like, if they talk about this within the Board of Regents, what happens, what has happened before? Has this happened before?
Okay, welcome back, Representative Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Omar, thanks for the question. Certainly it has come up in the past. I know that I was not on the board at the time, but I was certainly an observer about, 6 years ago, where there was a member where there was a conversation about a conflict issue. Well, there wasn't really a formal process to deal with the removal, so that was actually just sort of where that individual member said, I will abide by the wishes of the remaining members. I do know that part of why, I believe, part of why there isn't a clear process, and I actually think that it's an important process to try to identify, because you could have somebody who isn't maybe physically capable, or they have medical concerns or something where for an extended period of time are not able to perform, or there could be something where there is a criminal act or something that would create a disrepute question, the malfeasance part of it. I believe part of why it's not really necessarily addressed, and part of why we have 6-year terms and to that extent are sort of, and autonomous from the legislature is because if you have a simple process, I think about, I think we need a process. I sort of shudder at the idea that if 8 people don't care for you, they have the ability to kick you off the island. Because oftentimes we've found across the country in institutions like the University of Minnesota, a single board member who has raised questions has identified significant wrongdoing or issues that the public really should know about. And if you have the ability to have simply 2/3 of the board see you as not necessarily someone that they agree with on issues, they can really force compliance. And I think that's dangerous. So the idea of academic freedom is one of the reasons why we have autonomy, part of why we have long, 6-year terms and without a very clear process for removal is another part of it. I do think that there's wisdom in the question about whether we would be self-generating. I think there's a constitutional question about whether we could remove each other based on how we're appointed. But I do think that it's a good conversation to have. I appreciate Representative Schultz raising it because I know as a board it would be nice for us to have some clarity. What's the process and what are the conditions under which somebody would be replaced as a member of the Board of Regents to ensure that we have a full board serving the university?
Representative Jessup?
Regent Rosha, do you think this could be a topic that you and your fellow regents could discuss?
Regent Rosha?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Jessup, I can't speak for the chair, vice chair. They certainly have, the authority to direct the conversation, but I would certainly be willing to raise it with them. Right now we have a related, but certainly not the same question where one of our members is looking at a departure, and there's some question as to, well, what does that look like? What's the timing and so on, and how does the legislature respond to that in its current posture? But I would be more than happy to raise that with the chair and suggest that that's something that we could through the board office. I know we don't have a regents policy on it right now, but that's something that we could discuss and depending on what we're able to develop in that conversation, maybe communicate back to the chair and the committee. But again, I can't speak for him, but I would be willing to ask that.
Representative Jessup?
Thank you, Chair. Just general comment. We're here to really discuss the regent selection process here in the legislature, and I applaud Representative Schultz for bringing up this issue. But my preference would be is that the Board of Regents themselves discuss this particular topic first to see if they can come up with their own solution. And for our work here today to really focus as much as we can simply upon the election process itself.
Thank you, Regent Rosha. Thank you. And I agree that it's a worthwhile topic, but I guess in the chair's opinion, maybe this is not maybe the right time to spend more time on it, but to again, keep it on the burner, kind of.
Mr. Chair, well, I hope we have plenty of time this session to bring it back up again. We could take up, maybe we could hear my bill at another time this session, a standalone bill that is basically the amendment, and maybe get input from the Board of Regents. But I don't think, they have a conflict of interest policy, I believe, and that was the situation. I think they're looking to us to provide some guidance, and I think it's our job to have structure before something does happen and we're not in session and we can't do anything about it.
So we need to vote on this if you want to move forward?
I can remove it from the table if I can get a hearing on the standalone bill.
We will certainly, yeah.
Okay, I'll remove it.
Agreed?
Yep, thank you.
All right. We have another amendment, the A3 amendment. Who has?
I believe this
Oh.
is my amendment.
Well, my goodness. Representative Schultz.
So this amendment is also a standalone bill, but I've attended many Board of Regents meetings and streamed them in my role at UMD and as my role on this committee. And I've noticed that there tends to be a lot of questions from the regents themselves during these meetings. And if a faculty member was at the table, they could answer a lot of those questions. And so I looked to see what other R1 institutions had for composition of their Board of Regents and noticed that many of them had a faculty member as a regent. So this amendment would use one of the at-large positions and turn that into a faculty representative, just very similar to the student representative position. And there's also a drafting error in this amendment. Lines 1.14 through 1.19 need to be deleted.
Do we need a motion to strike that language? Representative Schultz?
What was that?
A motion just to strike that language?
Yes, I would like a motion to strike lines 1.14 through 1.19, an oral amendment to the A3 amendment.
Okay. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Anything further?
No, I'm open to questions.
Representative Christensen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and Representative Schultz, according to the Board of Regents policy of the University of Minnesota, it's a conflict of interest for a faculty member to serve on the Board of Regents. And I think it is a conflict of interest for a faculty member to be on the Board of Regents. So I'm just wondering kind of what your thought process was here. I mean, I guess also I'm interested just about the rotating through each university campus. Is there, does it have to rotate through every campus? Is there an order? That part seems kind of complicated. I'm just wondering on the procedure.
Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative, the university would have to amend its policies, and that's in line 1.21 through 1.23 to change that conflict of interest. I think it would improve the functioning of the board, having a faculty representative there. And if there's any conflict, if, say, the faculty unionize, they could recuse themselves from that vote if it's about a contract issue. But because so many other universities have found that it's helpful to have a faculty member there, I think we should discuss that in this committee and see if that would help improve the policies and the functioning of the university and the accountability. And that's why we have a student representative. And also the rotation across campuses, I think, would be useful for the Board of Regents and their other duties to get to know faculty members from other campuses and get to know more information about each of those campuses. So ideally, it would be nice if it rotated, if it was a 2-year term for the faculty and it rotated more frequently. But that would need to be changed by the Board of Regents themselves.
I may have missed something. Are you adding a member to the Board of Regents? Or
No, this is a conversion of one at-large seat. So one of the at-large seats would become a faculty
And that would
regent.
happen at the end of a particular term, I assume.
Right.
Not kicking somebody off.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Comments? Testimony? From anyone? Again, my only concern is that we're kind of broadening what we're doing here a little bit, but members, we will vote on this amendment. Okay. All those in favor then of the A3 amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. Okay, the amendment is not adopted. We move on to the A4 amendment. Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the A4 amendment is similar to the bill I presented earlier in committee. It uses a lot of your ideas in your DE4, and I think strengthens them by, whenever possible, ensuring gender diversity of the recommended candidates for each vacancy, and inserting language to recommend 2 candidates by the joint committee. Whenever possible, given the pool of candidates, the 2 recommended candidates must be different genders. And then it adds language to the joint convention electing regents, and we've already discussed that section.
Comments? Representative Whelan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Schultz, for just the creative way you're thinking about reform here. I think, like I said earlier, it's really important, and you, Representative Sundin, everybody who's bringing ideas forward, suggests to me that there's overall bipartisan support for some changes, which is great. My concern or my question maybe with regard to specifically pulling out gender diversity is that what would you say in a situation where, say, we had 11 people applying for one position, 10 of them were women, one was a man, and say, arguably all 10 women were more qualified, but because we need gender diversity, the way I read this, it would say that one man has to be recommended and then just one of the women, even if you could argue that some of the women were more qualified.
Representative Schultz?
I always think we should take the most qualified candidates regardless of gender. That's my personal view. But it's only whenever possible, so it's not must in the language in the bill.
Representative Whelan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for that clarification. I'm just concerned with the way that language reads. I'm not sure that, I didn't take that interpretation of whenever possible, meaning that I just don't think it's clear. So I'm wondering if there's a way to finesse that language to make that more clear, that your intent is really that the most qualified candidates are the ones that are put forward. I don't know the best way to finesse that, but I would just suggest if this moves forward, that would be something we might want to look at.
Representative Schultz?
Thank you.
All right. Anything else? A4 amendment. It's before us. And if there's no other discussion, then we will take a vote on the A4 amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Was not adopted. But thank you very much, Representative Schultz. Good work. We have to do more work.
I think so.
That's the secret. So no further amendments to House File 3372. And any further discussion? Representative Pulaski.
Mr. Chair.
Who was first here, but Representative Pulaski, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, your motion is to send it to GovOps, and if GovOps passes the bill, is it your intention to bring it back here and insert it in a supplemental, or is it going to the floor as a solo?
I think it would head to the floor, but we may have to confer with the House and Senate leadership. But that's my
The
feeling at this
intention then
point.
is to take it to the floor as a
Right.
solo bill.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, no further discussion. Oh, Representative Jessup, I'm sorry, I saw you before. Sorry.
Thank you,
Good
Chair. Just some comments. Since I'm a freshman, I've only gone through this process once with the RCAC. I just found it a very, very confusing process overall. And I appreciated the brief, I believe this came from Representative Whelan, in regards to the selection of the regents of the University of Minnesota. One of the key items here, it seems very, very simple, but I think it's an important one to really reflect on. 12 regents are elected by the legislature to 6-year terms. When we think of that, that is the responsibility that we have as a legislature. And as I looked at the RCAC, I felt like, we're basically hiring a third party, and I know that may not be correct, but I just want to take you through this. We're hiring a third party to give us recommendations on candidates that then we are supposed to additionally vet and then finally go ahead and elect as regents. And I think that the bill that you have before us, and I think the discussion that has gone on to really take and pull that responsibility back to ourselves as a legislature, I think is the right move. And I like the approach of trying to make this as bipartisan as possible with 2 members of each of the various parties in the House as well as in the Senate to work through this process. I think that's the right approach. And my hope would be is with the assistance of the Legislative Coordinating Commission and possibly even, I would say, the House HR group, if we really do need to have background checks, they do that already for staff that is employed here, that this is a possibility for us to do. Last item I would just like to mention is I think, and someone else can correct me, we had 36 applicants for for this last go-around, did we not? Just 36. 36 is a manageable number of applicants to go through and assess and vet. And so I look at this process, if it goes similar to last year, I think we can do a reasonable good job of vetting these particular candidates ourselves and bringing that responsibility back into our own legislature for the full process. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Jessup, for your comments. Anyone else care to say? We got 10 minutes left here, folks. Oh, Representative Whelan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to say, and I should have said this in my closing comments to my bill when I presented, serving in this body is really an honor. And for me, when we talk about Regents, it's kind of, I think about it in another light as well, being an alumnus of the university. And I know that a lot of us here care deeply about the university. We want to ensure the best process we can for that governing body. So when we're looking at all these different proposals, I really do hope that we can come to, and it seems like we have good bipartisan support for some of the different ideas. I just want to thank you, Mr. Chair, for your amendment here, and hopefully when we go forward to reform this process, we'll still continue to get some good candidates. I think the processes we have it needs some work based on the OLA report and some of the other testimony we've heard, but I just want to say thank you for your and everybody else's input on this.
Thank you, Representative Whelan. We do have someone who has indicated an interest in speaking to us. So have a seat.
Sir, thank you, sir. My name is Max Hurst. I am the Director of Government and Legislative Affairs for the Minnesota Student Association. I would be remiss if I didn't make a comment at least some point in this discussion. First, I'd like to thank you and the committee for putting a lot of effort and thought into this. We know that it's in the past has been a really arduous process, and that there's so much conversation on it now is really good to see. I would like to mention that on behalf of students, we really appreciate all the proposals going forward about making sure this is a bipartisan process. I think both within RCAC and also within making sure that if we do that there's a bicameral, bipartisan commission, making sure that's even is a good way to go. Also, the mention of some kind of language around diversity and making sure that our Board of Regents is representative of our state and as well as our university and student population is also something that's I thank you all for looking at as well, both in racial or ethnic makeup and gender and so on. One thing that I find a little bit of issue with, and I'm sure we can look into this in the future, is that if RCAC would be removed, there would be more difficulty, and I respect and I agree with Regent Rocha that there would still be avenues for student input to be included in this process, and I think it's something very important when it's our state's university, our legislature has its ability to give input. Alumni Association, but also the students that are there now, I think would be properly be able to give input. So whether that be included as one of the recommended consultants in the process, I think that would be, if RCAC would be removed, I think that would be a good way to go as well. And to mention that when we talk about student input, that is, I know in RCAC in the past they had input from all of our campuses, including our professional, graduate, student governments. So making sure all student voices are heard, I think, is essential. I would also like to mention finally that after speaking with some of our representatives to the Board of Regents, not our student regent, but representatives to the Board of Regents that work on the student government side and interface with our board, the biggest issue or qualm they had with last year's or last session's process was kind of the confusion with the floor nominations. And I definitely understand and respect the views of where that may be necessary and helpful, but it does, and I believe on behalf of some of those representatives to our Board of Regents, the ability to have that conversation and have that input not only from students, but also from our alumni and other stakeholders when they're no longer able to be part of that conversation once it's on the floor of the joint session. I think puts into some issues on whether that responsiveness to all those stakeholders is really being followed. But if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer some.
Representative Schultz has a question for you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for testifying. Can you tell us very briefly how students interact with the current process for regent selection?
Yeah.
Mr. Hurst?
Mr. Chair, Representative Schultz, thank you. So at this point, from my knowledge, and I'm going to be honest, that I haven't been fully involved in the regent selection process or have, I would say, the best knowledge of it from speaking with our representatives to the Board of Regents and members that have sat on RCAC before. I do know that in the past, and I maybe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there's been representation from each of our campuses' student government associations. So from Twin Cities to all of our system campuses, as well as professional and graduate student governments. After that, I'm not sure how much input has been put into place on the legislative side. I know that if RCAC would be removed, we would be trying to get as many students to those commission meetings as possible. The issue that I see is that we are full-time students and also trying to put ourselves through college, so trying to get to these meetings isn't always the easiest. So having those student seats on RCAC before was something that was very helpful, making sure that that voice is heard. Whereas if it's not explicitly stated somewhere in statute that students should be consulted, it might fall to the wayside or become less of a strong voice in the process.
Representative Pawlowski?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is not for the testifier, so if there are other questions for him.
I'm not sure there are any more questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Hurst, for being here. Yeah. Representative
Mr.
Pawlowski.
Chair, I noticed that you're the only author of the bill, so with your permission, I would like to sign on to the bill to continue this being a bipartisan process.
You're welcome.
Okay. I'll sign on today.
You bet. Thank you very much. All right. Then the chair renews his motion that House File 3372 as amended be referred to the Committee on Government Operations and Elections. All those in favor of passing that, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It's on its way. The members, you're out of here too. Meeting adjourned.